What's up, you guys? Welcome to episode 340 of the Established Run NBA podcast. I'm Mike Gallagher, getting ready to talk trade, a big one. With me to do so is Drew Dinkmeyer. How's it going?
It's always nice when the content is already decided for you, when the NBA decides to make a big move and it's right in the content window. Fits nicely. Trade happens on Wednesday. We record podcasts on Thursday. It's all beautiful. Love to be able to have the content made for us. Thank you, NBA.
Yeah, no brainstorming necessary for this one. We kind of knew what we were talking about. So yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about big picture stuff, value of the trade, rotations, fantasy, all that good stuff. And let's just get right into it. And let's talk about what happened with the Pacers picking up Pascal Siakam. A couple small stuff with Kyra Lewis getting thrown in there, basically just because the Pelicans wanted to save luxury tax. And then they're going to give up Bruce Brown, Jordan Nwora, and 3 firsts. Most of them aren't going to be high. You know, they're all lottery, top 3 protected. They're probably going to be at best like 15, 16, 17, at worst, upper 20s. So not a huge haul, I would say. But yeah, I'll just hand it to you there. What did you think of this trade from a value perspective?
So when you see 3 first-round picks, your first instinct for a player that's on an expiring contract and Pascal Siakam that an extension has to be negotiated is like, oh, that's a pretty good price tag from Masai to be able to get that out of Indiana. And then you read the pick details, and as you alluded to, it's going to be the 2 worst picks out of where OKC, Houston, the Lakers, and Utah finish this year. So if you look at where those teams, OKC is going to be the worst pick, right? So that is likely going to be towards the bottom 5 picks in the first round, most likely based on where they're currently slated to seed in the Western Conference. And then you look at, the next worst pick of the Lakers, Houston, and Utah. That's very likely a play-in team. Whether they actually make it into the playoffs or not, we'll see. But yeah, we're talking about a teens pick most likely, and then a mid to late 20s pick most likely for Toronto here. And then the next pick that they get is Indiana's 2025 or 2026? 2026. So 2 years out from now for Indiana, which on the trajectory they're on, you would think that would also be a non-lottery pick as well. So in terms of the value of the picks, they're not getting any high-end potential contributors from those picks. But with the new CBA and the way the league is going, just having extra players on rookie deals allows you to build more flexibly and also allows you more shots at finding impact players in the draft. So my first initial reaction on the price was 3 first-round picks along with Bruce Brown. That feels hefty for Pascal Siakam. And then looking at the details on the individual picks, I think that's a good haul for Toronto. But I also understand why Indiana made this move in the situation that they're in. They're feeling like we're not giving, Bruce Brown we signed as a free agent to be able to facilitate potentially this type of deal. And then 3 kind of back end first round picks for a player that we're going to try to extend and sign and build around as our core with Tyrese Haliburton. I understand it from both sides.
Yeah, I think it's better win for Indy, honestly. To trade Pascal Siakam, you're not getting back like blue chip assets. So I thought Indy did great. It's kind of always a buyer's market, I feel like, nowadays with the way that the picks are kind of valued. So I didn't think Toronto did poorly or anything, but I'm curious if they like asked for Kuminga or asked for something that could be, blue chippy. Of course, Masai could maybe pull a rabbit out of his hat and pick up pretty well picked. But yeah, I thought Toronto did fine, but I thought the Pacers really crushed it. So not have to give up Ben Mathurin, Jarvis Walker, really any high-end stuff on their team, I think was great. So I thought they really did well here. As you mentioned, Bruce Brown, like they wouldn't have been able to keep him anyways just because his contract's there. He's on a team option. So great. And they need to get to the salary floor. Like we talked about the overpay, and it's great, to get off. They're not going to miss him. And they have Andrew Nembhard anyways. So, and you could argue Nembhard's been a way better defender than Bruce Brown is. You don't need the handling. You got the best ball handler arguably in the NBA. So very superfluous. They've got TJ McConnell. They had a surplus in Bruce Brown's position. So I don't think they're going to really miss Bruce Brown. They're certainly not going to miss Jordan Nwora. That helps Jarvis Walker get a cleaner path. So I thought this was, really the best possible deal within reason that they could have got. Do you have anything to say with, I don't know I don't think the Raptors could have got much more, but I think that the Pacers gave up like the minimal amount to get this deal done.
Yeah, I think it's unclear what else would have been out there. I think the Golden State rumors are the ones that we focused on most with Siakam, and I think that would have made a lot of sense, but that whether Golden State was really willing to let go of Kuminga or not is unclear. He would be the piece that, would compete with the pieces that they have here. And I think there's also a question of like, is one Kuminga worth three mid to late first round picks? And I think you could make the case on either end of that spectrum with what we've seen from Kuminga at this point in his career. So I think Toronto did okay here. I think Indy did fine. No real issues from that perspective in terms of the value of the trade on the whole. And I always hate to speculate on exactly what a GM could have done elsewhere because you really don't know. And there's not really hard and fast reporting on this. So it's pretty tricky to kind of assume what the other offers are out there. That's the stuff I like least in terms of critiquing or analyzing trades, just because you really don't know what other conversations were available to these teams.
And it does help their, we talk about tanking a lot. We talked about this the last time we talked, Pascal. They're top 7 protected. So you're making your team a little bit worse. You really want to keep your draft. I know it's not a good draft, all that, but even picking top 6 in this draft is better than picking, nothing better than not picking. I should say. So I think that this is a good deal for them overall. And it's not like a full on rebuild. They got some talent on IQ, RJ Barrett. So it's kind of like a retooling, I guess would be the word that they use in trade lingo. But I thought that was pretty solid. Let's talk Indiana.
I also just I want to pause there real quick. In addition to, I think looking at the package, in addition to what they got for OG Anunoby, makes the whole series of transactions make a lot more sense as well, right? Because with the OG Anunoby trade, you didn't get picks, right? You got young players that were replacement players to kind of start to rebuild around. And Siakam, I think people thought it would be the other way around, right? I think people thought with OG Anunoby, you'd get the picks, and with Siakam, you'd get like the young impact player that you were kind of building around. And I think just because they did them in reverse, the totality of what they accomplished, I think was strong, right? They get a couple shots that they can take in terms of, we don't know what's in the mystery box of these different picks that they're going to acquire, but then they also got kind of known younger quantities that they can build around with quickly in RJ Barrett and Scotty Barnes, who they already have as the anchor. So like I think it's a good combination, the two packages in totality.
For sure. So let's talk about Indiana. They're sitting in the 7th seed, largely because of Tyrese Halliburton missing some time. Actually questionable today. They're playing in a back-to-back. I think he's going to sit today and play tomorrow. We'll talk about that on their injury show. Listen to it on YouTube. So yeah, where do they fall in for you? We'll talk more about specifics, but just from a standings perspective, where do you think you would slot the Pacers, and how much better does adding Siakam to them? And then again, we'll get into the nitty gritty, but just from 3,000 foot view, where do you think they kind of fall now if you're doing power rankings?
Yeah, they get meaningfully better, but that the battle to avoid the play-in the Eastern Conference is really starting to ratchet up. Cleveland's done such a good job at holding their own in the absence of Darius Garland and Evan Mobley. They've won 6 straight games now. They've moved their way up to the 4 seed, along with the Knicks kind of making a push here with the OG Anunoby acquisition still in the trade market as well for other players who are now getting linked to Bruce Brown potentially as well. The Miami Heat obviously in this range, and then Indiana and Orlando. Orlando sliding a little bit since the injury to Franz Wagner. So you've got 8 teams for 6 spots to avoid the play-in. And really what we're talking about here, because I think you can put Philadelphia, Boston, and Milwaukee on a different level entirely, you've got 5 teams really for 3 spots. And so ranking them, I think, is really, really challenging. Obviously, Cleveland has the benefit of being 2 games up in the loss column on the rest of these teams. There's still 40-plus games left for most of these teams, so it's still plenty of time to make up 2 games in the loss column, but they probably get the edge just from that perspective. But certainly Indiana made a really nice move here. And I think if you look at where Indiana has struggled this year, they've struggled in creating offense when Tyrese Halliburton is off the floor. So they're like a 98th percentile offense. I saw ESPN quoted this, but they're 98th percentile offense when Tyrese Halliburton is on the floor this year, and a 56th percentile offense when he's off the floor. And so having another kind of lead offensive player and ball handler and scorer in Pascal Siakam that they can stagger away from Tyrese Halliburton is a huge difference. And I also think, like, in terms of roster fits, this is probably the best landing spot you could get for Pascal Siakam, who's a little bit of an unusual fit in his own role. He has a lot of useful skills in being a very diverse offensive player, but a lot of them need the ball in his hands. And you wouldn't necessarily think that's a great fit for playing with Tyrese Halliburton, but I'll tell you why I think it is a pretty good fit with playing with Tyrese Halliburton, because first of all, the center that he's paired with is Miles Turner, a player who can space the floor. And I think that's really important for Pascal Siakam, playing alongside a center that can space the floor. In Toronto, he played with limited floor spacing throughout his time there. And as a result, I think everything was getting congested in the paint. And he's still a fairly good offensive player, even with a lack of spacing kind of around him. And Pascal himself does not create the spacing, but Halliburton can. And so I think they can even do stuff where, I know you don't want to take the ball out of Halliburton's hands because he's such an incredible decision maker and offensive player and offensive unit unto himself, but you could take advantage of Halliburton's spacing by using Siakam as an initiator offensively in the half court set. Obviously, you want Halliburton running everything in transition from that perspective because he's so good there. And that allows you to play basically 5 out with Pascal Siakam operating with the ball at the top of the key and pick and roll. You could even use Halliburton as the screener there and do pick and pop stuff. I think there's a lot of unique offensive combinations that they can get into now with this acquisition of Pascal Siakam. And then I think in they can also stagger him where he gets a lot of his primary usage and ball handling in the times that TJ McConnell is on the floor or Andrew Nembhard is on the floor. And I think you can even play less TJ McConnell now with Pascal Siakam because you can have Siakam kind of run more of the offense and staggered away from Halliburton. So I think it's a really, really great fit for Pascal Siakam to highlight and emphasize his talents. He's also a player that's pretty good in transition himself, just running the floor. And I think paired with Halliburton, that'll be really effective. So I'm really optimistic about this fit in terms of where it slides them in the standings. I would say a lot of these teams look very similar to me, and it's hard to pick through. Is New York substantially better than a healthy Cleveland? Is like we certainly in the playoff series, we saw that last year, but in the regular season perspective, is Indiana's now in that same level? I think yes. And I think the question mark now is more on Orlando. Is Orlando in that level? I think Orlando is the team that is now starting to have more question marks around them, but I think it's going to be a race to stay out of the play-in for these 5 teams. And I think Indiana just took a big step forward in trying to avoid that play-in.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. With the fit, Miles Turner spacing is a huge deal. I was going to say that and basically say the same exact things you did, so I won't repeat what you said. But yeah, I agree. I think Cleveland has an inside track. Darius Garland's starting to kind of trend here. Still going to wait for Mobley, but they've been filling it inside quite well. So I think they're the favorites. And then you're kind of mixing up between New York, who's been playing great, Indy, and then what's up with Miami? Who knows? You can't even really rank them. So yeah, I agree there. One thing I actually wanted to add with the value stuff. So about resigning him, obviously, if he walks, this is a bad trade. Having the ability to sign for another year, 8% raises, yada yada yada. I think it is worth it. Do you have anything just to add on? And yeah, one other thing too before I hand it to you. We always talk about opportunity cost. I mean, they probably got the best player in the market, so I don't know. I thought that was pretty good. But yeah, what do you think about just adding the value to sign him with the picks you gave up?
And also just in a position like, we'll talk about this with the Detroit trade as well, because the Marvin Bagley trade was with an eye towards free agency as well. But Indiana is not a destination that is historically reeled in big free agent talent, right? And so the question is playing with Tyrese Halliburton enough of an incentive for players to want to come to Indiana as a free agent and make that their choice and their decision? And I think that's unlikely to be the draw in and of itself alone. Obviously, money and finance and having the ability to give a player max contract would potentially lean in, but I think you're probably ultimately dealing on the best case scenario. You're dealing in this Pascal Siakam realm regardless. Like this is the level of free agent talent that you would probably be inspiring to come play to Indiana. So why not just lock that in? And make sure that you have it instead of rolling the dice. And if you roll the dice, you lose the opportunity for this season. And the Indiana Pacers franchise, this organization has prided itself on being competitive and not bottoming out for the last 30 years. I mean, last 30, 40 years. They have not bottomed out at any point, really. They have continued to be competitive in whatever version it was. The Reggie Miller Indiana Pacers, the Ron Artest Indiana Pacers, the Paul George Indiana Pacers. the Roy Hibbert Indiana Pacers, however you want to like go through the different iterations. Now the Tyrese Halliburton Indiana Pacers, they have prided themselves out on continuing to put out a competitive product year in and year out. And I think they value each and every season. And so in terms of what they could have done for this season, as you alluded to, there was nothing better that they could have done for this season. Mm-hmm. So if we're talking about, oh, maybe they could have saved that room for next offseason to make a move. Well, this season matters to them. And they are in the hunt to get a playoff series, which is more revenues for the organization, drives, creates more brand loyalty with the fan base. A lot of important things. So I think that in terms of comparing it to opportunity cost, in terms of what realistically Indiana could potentially have done at this trade deadline or in future off seasons, I think it's hard to imagine that they would have landed the plane on all of these things and saved those picks, So I think just getting the certainty of this season, getting Pascal, and I think they're very likely to be able to retain Pascal long term. I think that move made all the sense in the world to me. Now he's 29, so you're going to give him some like 5-year extension or something like that. That is going to be a little bit dicier towards the back end. And this might lower the ceiling of the team ultimately overall, like tying your franchise to Halliburton, who's on his path to a max contract, plus Siakam, and then like being somewhat limited. You're going to need to hit on draft picks that you now don't have to be like a title contender, but you've probably made yourself a solid playoff team for the next few years. And that has value for a lot of organizations. Like we're so caught up in rings culture and the idea that the only thing that matters for a successful NBA season is the team who wins the title. There's a lot of great successful NBA seasons that fan bases can enjoy and feel attached to and develop future fan bases, bring young kids when they're seeing, teams play in the playoffs and stuff. There's a lot of positives that come out of a season that's just not whether you win the championship or not.
For sure. And one more X's and O's thing. Halliburton's been really good with his jump shooting. He's 78 effective field goal percentage on unguarded catch and shoot stuff, which is only like a 40-shot sample because he had the ball in his hands. But I think that component being a bigger part of the offense could be huge. So, yeah, let's talk more about the rotation now. Let's just start with the starters. I feel pretty confident that when everyone's back, they're going to start Halliburton, Andrew Nembhard, Aaron Nesmith, Pascal Siakam, Miles Turner. Do you agree? And then we can get into why.
So Nembhard, your assumption is he takes the Bruce Brown role from a defensive perspective, and
more or less,
and as a result, that's why he gets kind of the benefit there. I think there's a chance that they view Pascal's defense is good enough that they feel like they only need one of Nesmith or Nembhard next to them. I think there's a chance that that's the case, and with Pascal's offense, I think there's a chance that they could see Buddy Hield's floor spacing as viable, but they've really de-emphasized Hield this year. The only other thing I'd note there is that perhaps they were de-emphasizing Hield because they did not know if at the trade deadline he would be a piece that they would be moving. I think they're more likely to be keeping him in this instance after adding to Pascal Siakam. So it's possible that Hield's role is more stabilized going forward. But I think it's certainly between Hield and Nembhard, in my opinion, for that last starter spot.
I agree. Yeah, just on-ball defense. As much as we'd like Aaron Nesmith he's a wing defender. He doesn't really pick up at the half-court line and all that. So yeah, just and like I said earlier, he's been a better on-ball defender than Bruce Brown is. Talking about Nembhard. So and then I should add also, Nembhard's been terrible as a ball handler this year. His efficiency's down. And who has been good as a ball handler? TJ McConnell. And they've been trying to find minutes for TJ McConnell. This is the easiest way to do it. We talked about the Pacers having a little bit of too much depth. Hey, they got rid of it for a piece that they need badly. They've been plugging in Jalen Smith. The Obi Toppin experiment didn't work. Talk about him in a second. So yeah, I feel I'd be pretty shocked if they started Hield. There's been a lot of buzz from Rick Carlisle that Buddy Hield has grown as a defender, whether we believe him or not. That's another story for another day. Maybe it is this day if you want to get into it, but yeah, I feel pretty good. They like Mathurin off the bench, and they like the TJ McConnell, Mathurin, Buddy Hield combinations together. We'll see what happens to Obi. So looking at the second unit, I mentioned those three guys. I think Obi's in, and then the next question is Jalen Smith taking Isaiah Jackson's role? And I think that's the case. So I think the second unit, we know Carlisle's into 10, so TJ McConnell, Buddy Hield, Ben Mathurin, Obi, and then Jalen Smith, I think. But there could be games when they kind of go bigger. We've seen Carlisle being more open to playing the double big off the bench, maybe if they play against the Bucks or something like that. So thoughts on the second unit there. Anything else you want to add?
My only question mark on the second unit is if they decide to try to facilitate getting the ball in the hands of Pascal Siakam more, that could de-emphasize TJ McConnell some. Simply because TJ McConnell's usefulness on the floor is primarily with the ball in his hands. He's not a shooter. He doesn't provide floor spacing. He doesn't provide a ton of other offensive options, and except when he has the ball in his hands, which he's very good at breaking down people off the dribble, getting into the paint, and creating shots for other people. And if they decide to, hey, we need to get Siakam enough of his rhythm with the ball in his hands when Tyrese is off the floor, that's my one thing that things could change. And that would also facilitate more of a rotation in the first unit with pairing Halliburton and Hield more together and Nembhard and Siakam more together naturally in terms of those combinations. I don't know if that's the way they end up. I think your initial instincts are probably most likely, but that's the one thing that I would highlight there. And then Obi Toppin, I think that's the one sort of, when you look at the totality of the Indiana Pacers and how they've transformed this team over the year, I think that's the one move where you'd like, wish we had that one back, right? Wish we didn't trade 2 second-round picks for Obi Toppin for a guy who's now fringy part of our rotation. We gave it a try to see if he could be a starter caliber player at the NBA level. Wasn't really working for us. We had to keep kind of mixing and matching. That's the one piece of this whole thing that this last 6 months for them that I wonder if they wish they had back. But yeah, I think Obi is probably in there as the backup 4 and Jalen Smith is the backup 5. Jalen Smith also replicates a lot of things that Miles Turner can do in terms of stretching the floor, not as effectively as Miles Turner, but stylistically a little bit more similar than what Isaiah Jackson brings. And he can do some of the role stuff that Isaiah Jackson does. Not as effective as a finisher on that side, but can do some of those things. So I think that's right that Jalen Smith shifts to the 5 here.
Yeah, for sure. And then we talked a little bit about the offensive style. Obviously, if you want to add anything, I don't think we really need to. But do you think they're the number 1 offense going forward still? Obviously, I think they're pretty heavy favorite at this point.
I think so. You have to imagine that adding a secondary shot creator in the way that Siakam is, and which would also allow you to emphasize Halliburton's shooting, which is incredible, can only improve things. So I think they've obviously been perhaps outperforming, so I think there might be some normal regression just in terms of the offensive efficiency that they've run it to this level with Tyrese Halliburton. But any of that regression would be met with more, just an overwhelming amount of more offensive talent with Pascal Siakam compared to what they were running out there before.
Yeah. Totally agree. And then defense. So we saw the pre-Jalen Smith defense with Obi in there for most of it. They were terrible. They were the worst defense in the NBA. Since they moved to Jalen Smith, they've been hanging around top 10 defense per possession. I think Pascal Siakam's reputation as a defender has gotten significantly worse. Maybe you could talk about motivation. He has the physicality and the length and all that stuff. So I think their defense gets a little bit worse than where they were. So I would say they're probably 23, 24, something like that, maybe worse. I think their defense gets worse to what we've been seeing. How do you feel their defense kind of holds up with Pascal in there?
I think Pascal has the talent to hold what they were gaining of late with Jalen Smith. He doesn't have the same physicality as Jalen Smith and maybe not the same shot blocking and length, but I think he has a little bit of the versatility, the switchability, that they could play some different defensive schemes as well, which I'm interested to see. I think that will take time to develop to see if they test stuff there. But yeah, Pascal's reputation as a defender was strong early in his career and has tailed off as he's taken on more usage offensively. Those two things often go hand in hand together. Now, I will say this year, as the usage came down a little bit with Scotty Barnes, I was not seeing the big increase in defensive value from Pascal. So maybe it's just not there anymore. I think it will be put to the test a little bit more in this situation. So my guess is that they're better than the Obi Toppin days. I feel confident in that. They're probably a little worse than what we've seen of late, but I don't think it's out of the question that they can replicate what they've been doing of late if Pascal is engaged defensively.
For sure. One other note I wanted to mention too, just with the Pascal transition game, he's been pretty good in that role, which is obviously a big thing for how the Pacers play. We saw last year with Nurse, they were flying, man. So I think he really, really fits their scheme offensively, just to add that. So let's go to winners and losers. Let's start with the big guys and Halliburton and Pascal. Do you have a lean on if their fantasy value gets better or worse? Let's start with Halliburton.
I think it's hard to imagine Halliburton's fantasy value improving. It's just so high. Like how could it be any better than what it's been basically to this point? And he's going to have somebody who could share more offensive responsibility. He's already converting potential assists at a really high rate. So it's hard to imagine his value getting any higher. Does it meaningfully decrease? I don't think so. No. So I think he's largely unchanged. Maybe it gets a little bit worse, but I don't think anybody that has Tyrese Halliburton in fantasy is going to be concerned at all about this moving the needle on Tyrese Halliburton's value.
Yeah, I totally agree. I have nothing to add. And then Pascal, I would say, is a little bit of a loser. You're losing a big chunk of handling. We've seen him hang and 5-6 assists at times when he's cooking. And the pace does help, the scoring, the efficiency. So I would lean like slight loser, but he's getting out of a tanking situation, which we kind of always knew.
Yeah.
So from a perceived value standpoint, I say it's a teensy bit of a loss. I would say he's a bigger loss than it was for Halliburton, to put that.
Interesting. I think he's a winner. I think what you're gonna get made up. Now I'm thinking more in the terms of category fantasy scoring as opposed to points-based fantasy scoring.
Yeah, I'm kind of doing a blend.
Yeah, he might be able to keep up with the added pace. Yeah. The question ultimately will be like, where do the minutes settle? That's the big unknown. Obviously in Toronto, he was allowed to play mid to upper 30s minutes kind of routinely. If he is allowed to do that in Indiana, I think the counting stats are going to be quite good. Despite potentially lower usage just because of the volume of possessions that they're going to tag up. And I think the efficiency is going to make up for any loss in usage just naturally. Do the assists take a hit? Possibly, most likely. But I think there's a chance that they do incorporate him as a ball handler a little bit more. And he was losing some ball handling to Scotty Barnes already. So I think there's a chance that it could all actually hold and the efficiency just kind of gets better. I think that's a small chance. I think it's most likely that the assists come down a little bit and you have to maintain the scoring based on the efficiency, and that works out okay. And then I think rebounding next to Miles Turner, I think is actually pretty good spot. Miles Turner's not the most aggressive defensive rebounder. Offensively, from a rebounding perspective, he's often spaced out. That leads to a lot of potential offensive rebounds for wings and forwards. So I actually think it's a decent spot for him from a rebounding perspective. And I just think he's a guy that is so much more effective in transition than he is in the half court. And most players are, but I think him to a really heavy extent that just playing up and down in transition is going to be really, really good for his efficiency.
Yeah. Just to, I guess, chop it up, I would say his category value comes up, but the overall counting stats, I think, are coming down a little bit. Obviously, in daily fantasy, we care about scoring. I think the scoring is a little bit lower. I think there's just more guys that can cut him out, but it's a bigger pie, right? You got a really, really good offense. So, it's pretty tiny, but again, we talked about Halliburton like barely losing, and I think it's kind of the same. Like I think from an overall like how many counting sets he's getting is a slight loss. Let's just hit the losers really quick. Obi Toppin, catastrophe. He needs a trade now, and there's been a report from Michael Scotto saying that they're not done yet. If you have Obi Toppin best ball shares, you want him out of there now. Any other like clear losers that you wanted to hit on this team besides Obi?
Yeah, I think, there's not much else that was having a lot of fantasy value there. I think, Buddy Hield, I'm kind of torn on it. I think there's a chance that he has a second life here with Indiana, but I think it's thin. I think you would much rather have seen a trade, and I think a trade is much less likely now for Buddy Hield. So I think he's probably a loser in this situation just because there was the hope of a trade unlocking further value and allowing someone to play him 30 plus. I don't think he's going to get that opportunity with the Pacers. I think it's probably it's definitely a hit to Jalen Smith. If there was any like Jalen Smith hope or love out there, he now needs an injury to Miles Turner to really potentially unlock him. I think it's slight downgrade for Miles Turner just because his usage is going to go down. You're going to see more of the Miles Turner from, let's say, 2 years ago than you have the last 2 years. Maybe somebody who's more like a 13 and 7 or 8 guy with a couple blocks instead of maybe a 15.5 and 9.5 type guy. So I think he takes a little bit of a hit. Just everybody kind of incrementally gets a little bit of a hit here. And Bruce Brown has had really inconsistent value this year, so maybe things are a little bit better for him. In Toronto, we'll get to the Toronto side in a second here. Yeah. Mathurin, I think it's a little bit of a downgrade, just having another scorer on the floor at all times paired with him. So I think everybody kind of loses a little bit on the Indiana side.
Yeah, I would just with Mathurin, as a guy who has a little bit of 6 man of the year stuff, this hurts because there was a lot of times he was closing, and he was closing because they would play Neesmith at the 4 a lot, and that's how he would kind of get spots at the 2-3 because they would play smaller. Now you have Pascal and Miles Turner, like they're going to close with them almost every night. So I think we saw those every once in a while. Mathurin pop up there for like 33, 34. I think that's like really off the table now, just because we know what their front court closing is going to be like. They're going to need Neesmith or Nembhard, one or the other. So, and then obviously closing with Halliburton. So, I think Mathurin's like a pretty sizable loser overall. But if the Pacers get hot, maybe he could find 6 man of the year value. Anything else Pacers wise before we jump to the Raptors? I think we kind of covered them.
Yeah, I think we can go to the Raptors.
Cool. Just overall thoughts on how this looks from them. We talked about the value, but what does this team look like overall, or just from like before we get into rotations?
Yeah, it's clunky now. So they're just very small as a team now. On the whole, you've got Bruce Brown, who positionally you can play him kind of all across. He had played bigger up in his Brooklyn days, and then last year kind of found a home playing as a guard. There's not as much room on the guard side of things for Bruce Brown now, so I'm kind of interested to see where he's going to fit in. Obviously, Scotty Barnes goes up positionally to a 4 because they just don't have a lot of depth at that position now, and we've seen the issues that they have at the depth at the 5 spot without Jakob Poeltl once he's gone down. So they're just really thin in the front court. The roster is tilted kind of towards the guard side of things, and I don't know if that makes it a little bit murkier in terms of figuring out the guard minutes. They obviously have to make another trade, and whether it's Bruce Brown or Gary Trent, I think you'll see some other trade be made, but it's short term. It's a little tough to figure out how all these minutes are going to work. We know they're going to emphasize Emmanuel Quickley and RJ Barrett. We know they're going to focus on those 2 players from a developmental perspective. So Dennis Schroeder, Gary Trent Jr., and Bruce Brown right now, it's up in the air on all 3 of those guys. And I really don't think Gary Trent's value is going to move much, whether he gets traded or not. I think he'll be used in the same kind of role, like 25 minutes a night, floor spacer, points only type guy, three pointers and points only. But Schroeder is the one that I think his value is really kind of up in the air at the moment. It needs sort of a trade to clear a little bit more playing time, because he's going to need playing time to be valuable from a fantasy perspective.
Yep. And then I think Dennis Schroeder's eligible to be traded date just passed on the 15th. Obviously, Trent could be traded. They're gonna have to just trade somebody. Bruce Brown could be flipped. I think there's something in the CBA where he has to be like,
can only be a 1-for-1 deal.
Yep, 1-for-1. Yep. So there's that there. But yeah, kind of unclear. So I do think IQ and RJ and Scotty are pretty stabilized. We'll see if Poeltl comes back and all that. So it's, like you said, it's kind of like a incomplete grade right now. And then I don't all these like dart throw guys like Jordan Noor, who's pretty good per minute, and Grady Dick, I think that he could clear out. He's been terrible per minute. So yeah, kind of like in a holding pattern. Curious to see if they get rid of Chris Boucher, whose value's in the tank. We've seen Jonte Porter be pretty inconsistent in his starting role. So yeah, kind of unclear. So I don't really have too much to say on the Raptors side. Do you have anything else you want to kind of mention from like winners, losers, and stylistic standpoint?
Yeah, I would just say, obviously, Scotty Barnes is a winner in terms of having positionally to play up. That helps the rebounding stuff that he was so good early in the season. We'll see if they can the other thing about Bruce Brown temporarily is maybe they use Bruce Brown as a primary wing defender, and that frees up Scotty Barnes to get back into kind of a secondary help role, which would help the rebounding numbers as well. The ball's going to be in Scotty and IQ and RJ's hands a bunch. So those 3 guys, I think, all benefit just from having one less usage piece around. But everybody else, I think it's murky until the trade clears up playing time situations. And ultimately, this roster, I think one of the interesting things is ultimately it now looks like this roster is building with Scotty Barnes as a 4 and RJ Barrett as a 3, right? Like that's the future of things going forward. So in terms of what that means for this team, I think it's very helpful that Scotty Barnes has shot the ball as well as he has this year. They will need to have that level of shooting going forward, because we have not seen RJ Barrett be able to maintain that level of consistent 3-point shooting. And if you have two guys at the 3 and the 4 spot that are, let's say, like 35 or below, then you start to run the risk of being a team that doesn't have enough shooting, which is what we saw from the Toronto teams for so many years. So it's the one thing that I'm like kind of noting, like, Scotty's really got to keep this shooting up for this whole thing to work in the way that they want it to work. And that's one of the challenges of the way that they've, roster built over the years, which a lot of length and athleticism and de-emphasizing shooting, I think quickly helps it a lot. And they made a big move to getting quickly there to fill that role. But I think they need Scotty to continue to shoot the way he has this year for this team to be, a threat 2-3 years from now.
Yep. Yeah, so we'll see. Again, expecting Masai to clear the decks. At least they have a direction now. We talked about teams just kind of sitting around and sitting on their hands too long. They have a direction. So I think that's always a win. Anyone who's followed the pre-Bucks, the pre-Giannis Bucks knows all about this and all this stuff. So let's shift gears to the other trade this week, and it was Marvin Bagley getting sent to the Wizards at quite an opportune time for him, with Daniel Gafford going out for a concussion. So we'll be talking a lot about Marvin Bagley on the content today. But yeah, so Pistons pick up Danilo Gallinari, Mike Muscala, and the Wizards are getting Marvin Bagley, Isaiah Livers, and some cheap draft stuff. What were your initial impressions of this trade for either team? You can go in any way you want.
Yeah, so I'll start on the Washington side. It's been very clear what they are trying to do since the new front office took hold, is they are just trying to acquire assets in whatever way they can. They will pay salary to acquire assets, and so that's what this trade was. From Detroit's perspective, it's not that they're interested in Danilo Gallinari and Mike Muscala as like the missing pieces to this roster build. They are trying to clear the salary commitments to Marvin Bagley next year and Isaiah Livers in order to clear cap space. And they will now have enough cap space to potentially go out and sign like 2 max free agents, right? That's the whole idea that Detroit's trying to do.
Yep.
Questionable tactic, right? What have we seen Detroit be able to accomplish in the free agent market in the past? It's been like Jeremy Grant. It's been the second tier guys. And I think what they're hoping to do is model what Houston did this past offseason, which is, we're the only place that has money, so you got to come to us. I think Houston is a more desirable location for NBA players during the winter than Detroit is, both from a climate perspective, but also from a tax perspective. Yeah, so I don't know if it will work the same way, but that's clearly what they're trying to do. And I'm torn on that. If I'm in Detroit's shoes, do I need 2 max spaces? Am I likely to land 2 guys? I don't know. I'd kind of rather have the extra picks personally, but they needed to clear out Bagley because there was no place for him to play on this team, and similarly with Livers. So, it's a really small move on the margins. I don't think it's anything to get worked up about in either direction. Do I think just strategically the idea of creating a bunch of cap space and trying to build through free agency makes sense for Detroit? No. Do I think this ultimately is going to matter? Not really. So that's kind of where I'm at. For Marvin Bagley, I think it's a good opportunity for him. I think it's interesting that his acquisition with Washington, a team that's been center thin all year long with nothing basically behind Daniel Gafford, they've been forced to play Gallinari out of position as a center this year, comes at a time where immediately after this, there were some floated reports that Washington has a really high asking price on Daniel Gafford in the trade market. And I thought that was very interesting, just in the sense that, well, do they have a high asking price because they're being greedy, or because they know they can't really trade him because they have literally no other centers on the roster? And if they are interested in trading Daniel Gafford at all, then that's a really strong commitment to Marvin Bagley for the rest of the season in terms of a runway to really prove a former, top 3 overall pick in the draft, a player that offensively is very talented, has his defensive limitations, has struggled to create efficient offense in his NBA career, but has talent, getting kind of that runway that he hasn't had since his very early days in Sacramento. He had a brief period of maybe 15, 20 games that he had it last year in Detroit, but then they went out and got Weissman, and then they were like kind of competing against each other again. So I think for Bagley, it's an opportunity. I'm not expecting him to necessarily change our opinions of Marvin Bagley as a basketball player. in this time. I'm not expecting that to happen, but it's an opportunity for him, and that's good. And so I'm grateful to see a young, talented player get an opportunity to potentially rework his career. We'll see if he's able to do it successfully. I'm skeptical, but it also just generally, I think it's good for the Wizards' younger players and whatnot to just play with more like how you will play in the future. The way they've been playing with like Gallinari at the 5 and stuff, that's not how you're going to play in the future, either offensively or defensively. So Bagley has his limitations, but it's at least more skill role appropriate for the position in terms of how these guys are going to keep growing together. So, I think it's for Washington's perspective, they get extra assets. They get a look at Bagley. They make the roster a little bit more appropriate positionally. All seems okay to me.
Yeah, I think that's it. I don't have much to say, but yeah, we always talk about in fantasy, it's where talent meets opportunity. Can't get a better opportunity than this one for Marvin Bagley. So in a fast-paced system, I think Bagley could really put up some pretty big numbers, especially as we wait for Gafford. And just a little behind-the-scenes stuff, we were doing the Washington minutes today without Gafford. And we were just fine. We were trying to find minutes. We just couldn't find center minutes. It was like, let's just give him to Bagley so he could play a lot. So yeah, it's going to be a fun style play for them. And then they're obviously not done. We know Tyus Jones is one of the best point guards on the market. We'll see if anybody else can come off the books. Curious to see how this Isaiah Livers fits. Maybe they bump out Landry Shamet, something along those lines. Obviously not a lot of value, but yeah, if you're listening to this and Marvin Bagley's on the wire, like I would for sure pick him up.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else to add here?
No, as always, if you're interested in supporting our content, for those of you who are not watching us on YouTube, you can check out these podcasts on our YouTube channel, Established Run NBA. Make sure to subscribe to that YouTube channel, hit the bell, get notifications whenever we go live or with new content. We'd appreciate your help in our march towards 5,000 subscribers by the end of the NBA season. You can also find our injury analysis show Monday through Fridays on that YouTube channel at 2 p.m. Eastern. Each day we break down the day's injury report and get you prepared for the NBA slate in the day ahead. As always, if you're interested in checking out any of our premium content behind the paywall, check us out at establishedrun.com/subscribe-NBA for more details on our player props packages, our NBA DFS packages, so on and so forth.
Yep, should be fun. Getting close to the All-Star break, pretty much at the halfway point of the season. Pretty wild. So appreciate everyone listening. Catch you guys next time.